you doing, Bob? Another Citizens for a Better Broome podcast.
Andy, good afternoon. Happy to be with you. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into our podcast. We try to do it once a week for 15 or 20 minutes and catch you up on the latest and greatest news and affecting all of us here in Broome County. You can check us out on Facebook. We're working on getting that presence a little bit more buttoned up and relevant to everything. And so we're working on that. Please bear with us. And also, whatever we happen to write will be on bobkingsley.com and all the blog posts. So please avail yourself to that and leave us comments, questions, whatever you'd like. Remember also that our monthly meeting is the first Monday of the month. We are still a little bit in limbo as to where that's going to be next month because working on a better location than where we were at. It was a little too noisy and thirsty. So working on that, but maybe next week we'll have an answer for you, but stay tuned for that.
Well, one of the things that caught my eye last week was Governor Hochul had a meeting with some of the parents and the children of parents were put into the death camps of the nursing homes during the COVID, and that she apologized and was sincere with tears and asking not necessarily forgiveness, but apologizing for, how inadequate the state was and allowing, the sick to be dumped off on the nursing homes. Well, she is part of the Cuomo administration. What was she doing? She's effectively the lieutenant governor. She wasn't aware of what was going on. Was she completely marginalized? I guess that's what she's hiding behind now, that it wasn't her fault at all, or that she doesn't have any complicity in this. Basically,
I would guess that
a crime.
She probably was marginalized. I mean, I would think, as much as I think that Ms. Hochul is a clone of properties that made up our former governor and King Cuomo, I would guess that she was marginalized. I would think that in most cases, lieutenant governors aren't probably in on the day-to-day. Yeah, not in on the day-to-day, but given these ancillary tasks to do that the governor doesn't want to do. So I would look, that was a terrible thing. What happened? It was terribly mismanaged. I mean, it's in large measure what cost Cuomo his job, that and his preponderance to act inappropriately with a dozen girls or so. Yeah. Takes his cue from our commander in chief when it comes to that, apparently. So I would give her a pass on that, but there's plenty of other things to bash her on because she's not proving to be much of a leader. She's more cut from the same cloth, as I said before, from Andrew. So
well, the early handicappers are seeing her about 40%, 45%, the eventual primary winner. But the polling is very, it's split about the direction the state is going and where she is going. And she's, her numbers are only, 44%. Of course, the Democrats are really,
it's going to be an interesting midterm. That's for sure. It's going to be an interesting midterm. I don't know, if we've had enough as a group in New York to stem the tide and flip this back to a Republican. I don't think so. I think that New York City and downstate has us pretty locked up. And as you know, running as an incumbent assures you a high percentage of repeating. And even though she was never elected, she still will be in effect an incumbent because she holds the position. So that combined with Democratic state, I think she's probably, I hate to say it, but I would think that it's very likely she prevails.
Well, there's a lot of home cooking going on. And as Cuomo had cooked the books, and I'm sure that she's not above any of that as a political animal. And the number one job of any elective is to stay elected. So we'll see how that shakes out. And this, New Yorkers, this is distressing where, you're only looking at 44% of the population really feels that the state's going in the right direction. And yet she comes out and is just dumping on more bail reform, more decriminalization efforts. So proactive in New York City. What about the rest of the state? What about Long Island? I'm not seeing.
Well, what about Broome County? I mean, that's where we're trying to focus on. And,
right.
We're trying to affect change here when we can and keep our eye on things here. I don't see great things happening in Broome County because of this either. I mean, here you've got Akshar, who was the replacement for Tom Libas, who was bringing the bacon, basically astroturfed everything in sight on every school ground in Broome County in his district, but was ran out of runway with his problems with efficacy. And, so now we've got Akshar. He doesn't want to be senator anymore, so we're going to end up with Rich David probably in there. And Rich will probably bring home the bacon for us because he's a local guy. But again, as long as we're faced with a one-party rule, see
We're-
much hope there. I mean, look what's happening in Johnson City with an uncontested mayoral race coming
Right.
up. Mr. Maney about to become the de facto mayor of Johnson City when he was the head of the union that basically bankrupted the village to begin with, courtesy of Harry Lewis back in the day. So
we have
people just don't get it.
we have a succession of caretaker governments over and over each elected cycle. Why can't the citizens of the county, can't we rise up and bring a class action suit against these leaders or these governments that are ineffective? And by demonstrating their malfeasance is the cost of government, and the cost
every 2 years. Every 2 years we get to do that. It's called an election.
Okay.
And we don't do it. And
we
that's
don't
the
do it,
problem.
yeah.
And the people who are running for school board, for example, got to question what their motives are, if it's just resume building or if it's someone associated tightly with either the union or the district itself or employees,
Which is likely the
spread
case,
out
the
through the
vested
union
interests.
right, terribly vested
Yeah,
interests,
right.
and not necessarily the interests of what first should be the educational component. How well are we educating these kids? Number one. And number two, how can we do it in the most effective way and afford it? Okay. And not just throw money at it, but actually come up with a plan that says, we need to not burden the taxpayers any more than we have to. And we need to get our money's worth from, what we can afford. And I don't think that's happening. I think there's too much, these school board elections need to be coordinated back into sync with regular elections instead of these oddball times when the only thing you're doing is voting for school board.
Right.
It discourages participation,
Which is
and
the whole
it's done
point.
purposely. Well, it's done purposely to put
Yeah.
the people in there that they want in there. The system that creates itself and then
Protects
multiplies itself.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there should be initiatives done statewide that pair these elections to regular elections so that it's all done at once. It would save a lot of money too. After all, you have to put together personnel to do all this and count the votes. Why not do it at the same time you're electing your mayor and your council? Why not do the school board at the same time?
Well, that definitely makes sense. And they probably have good answers of why that's not the case over the years. But your point is well taken, is that the system does protect itself, and it, like any bureaucracy, it wants to survive.
Well,
And
look
that-
at turnouts. I mean, even when there's a mayoral race, you're lucky to have a 50% turnout on a good year. And you take and do that same election, but the only thing you're talking about is whether or not to buy a new school bus and whether Susie Q or Jimmy John gets on the school board. You're talking about friends and family vote. That's it. So,
well, and that's your friends, family, and neighbors. That's what
and that's what we get. We end up with a cook school board. And I know for a fact, I know people in our group that have either on school boards now or have been on school boards that were contacted directly by the superintendent saying, put yourself on the ballot. I need allies. Now that's really not the way that we want to see this happen. We don't want the school administrators to have allies necessarily. We want them to have oversight.
Well,
this isn't
government,
a good old boys club. This is oversight, management.
well, this is what it is. It is the good old boy and girl club. Well, government.
Well, you put you put the doctor title over at the end of someone's name, and all of a sudden they're godlike to some of these people on school boards. And it should be just the opposite. It should be, listen, you work for us. God bless you. We pay you. And, you're going to take our lead from us. We're not taking our lead from you. So I think most school boards got it ass backwards, and we need to fix that with election cycles that mirror image other elections as well.
Well, and it seems the progressive crowd is usually on that or on the school boards, and any, some of these wacky ideas that you see in the news is running against us from people like ourselves that are asking for accountability and more efficiencies of running school boards and governments. And you have
look at the money we throw at it. I mean, you're talking 20, in some cases, in some districts, way over $20,000 a year per student.
Right.
These are figures that boggle the mind when other states are doing better than we are in standard testing and outcomes and spending half the money. So it's not about money. It's about a lot of things. It starts with the local involvement you folks that are listening can get involved with, and that is by running for school board and bringing some common sense to this thing. It's one thing for us to talk about it and bitch about it, but really we need people that actually can, put their shoulder to the wheel here and actually
Well, and that
drive
gets back to the
some
apathy
change.
question.
So please consider that, if you're of mind to, is running for school board and seeing what you can do to make some changes.
Broome County Executive Garner has issued a social distancing warning where UHS now is not allowing visitation under certain conditions because of flare up in COVID cases, 750. Of course, the highs for Broome County during the height of this pandemic was I was charting them, they were 16 to 1700. And then he mentioned about social distancing and avoiding large groups. Well, what happened last weekend with the Speedy Fest? So again, right. They're given the wrong signals. And if maybe he was off on the narrative from the state level, maybe he had to come forward and say something. Or UHS.
Well, I think more and more people are realizing that this has a lot less to do with the pandemic and a lot more to do with testing the limits of control over people. I think more and more people are becoming aware of that as they see that there's a lot of these mandates and regulations and rulings that don't make a lot of sense when you compare them to what's going on in the real world. And you also think back to what they told us originally about flattening the curve and
sure, and the flip-flops.
Just making sure we don't. Yeah. So there's a lot of BS being blown our way, and some people are happy to go along to get along. I see people in their cars alone, windows rolled up, masks on. I saw a guy the other day on the street, honest to God, Andy, he's got a mask on and he's riding a bicycle and he's smoking a cigarette through the mask. It must have been a hole poked in the mask. Honest to God, here's a brain surgeon.
What do you? Yeah, right. What do you say
to people who are walking down the street alone with a mask on? What are they? What are they thinking? I mean, this is just an example of.
Well, I see that on the south side, all the go out at the bus stop. But then, in fairness, they're getting on the bus and they've got to wear a mask. I'm not seeing it, in Lowe's or in the Weiss. I'm seeing maybe 30% masks, just an anecdotal observation. But what we are seeing is in my own family orbit, and I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not, but we had an acquaintance, the husband and wife, both got COVID, both vaccinated, really haven't been anywhere, and they perished.
Both of them
locally, yeah. And it.
Oh my God!
This was about.
It's terrible.
I don't know the timing on this, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, but so people are still getting sick, and I don't know, the underlying conditions, and if there was, like, the president went out of his way yesterday to say that Colin Powell had, all these pre-existing conditions, and
right,
he
was also 84 years old.
Yeah, exactly, and then 24,000 cases Broome County has of COVID, so which is probably about saying maybe 15% of the population has gotten COVID in Broome County. Right. But it is distressing about the vaccination and all the people that are still getting sick.
Yeah, and again, you hear the more information you get, the more confusing it is. There's just an overwhelming amount of info if you want to go seek it out. And depending on what your source is, I'm sure if you go over to CNN, you'll get a boatload of information, and it will conflict directly with what Fox is telling you and what the networks are telling you and what Facebook might be telling you and what your neighbor is telling you anecdotally. So it really, really is difficult. And I don't blame people for feeling however they feel, because it is overwhelming. And even for those of us who are news junkies and try to gather up as much as we can, I have to confess that I'm not convinced one way or another.
Confused.
I mean, I am confused, and I'm not normally confused. I don't like the state of confusion. So I go out of my way to avoid it. I have to say, you can find whatever you want.
What a narrative that you want to believe in, right? Exactly.
Yeah, God bless you. I don't know. Anyway, I think we've probably hit our allotment of time.
Yep,
folks.
That we have.
Please check us out on Facebook as we try to improve that presence. Remember that next week, we'll give you a heads up as to where you can meet us for our November meeting, the first Monday in November. And again, bobkingsley.com will bring you to the blog. Andy, thank you. It's always good to get together with you and hash these things around. And folks, keep the faith. We'll talk to you next week.
Great. Thank you. Bye.